So, in terms of your work with the Tibet House, and I'm just going to repeat that real quick because we saw that the recording volume needed to be adjusted. Your
Okay.
work with the Tibet House coincides with your work at Columbia University as part of the Indo Tibetan Studies program.
Well,
And so,
It's affiliated. We have a Center for Buddhist Studies in the Religion Department, which is affiliated with Tibet House and
yes,
with the American Institute of Buddhist Studies. There are three organizations, but you don't have to
three.
fuss with all of that.
Okay.
It's
Well,
okay.
as I was saying, and I'll just say it again since now we're on proper volume, it's a delight to talk with you, and I thank you, Robert Thurman, for joining us. And I
Well,
think most people know you because of your long-standing friendship with the Dalai Lama, and so I want to just kind of go there first, if you don't mind. And
sure.
I was reading about you, and I watched in preparation for this interview. I watched your TED Talk, and I want to ask you some questions about that. But I started wondering about your own spiritual journey and how it started and how you met the Dalai Lama. You had an accident, and that started a series of travels that brought you to India. Is that right?
That's
Would
it.
you mind sharing that with us?
Not at all. Yes, I that precipitated me deciding that my hobby or my spiritual quest was more important than my Harvard education.
Mm,
And so I went to India, but not necessarily to see the Dalai Lama. I didn't know yet who he was, but I knew there would be some yoga, spiritual yoga of the mind and body, but particularly of the mind and of the emotions that would be more helpful than Western philosophy and psychology as far as I understood it at that time, 1962, 61.
hmm
And so then I went to India as a pilgrim. It took me about almost a year to get there, hitchhiking and walking, etc. And then when I met the Tibetans, I realized that the Tibetans had the knowledge that I wanted, and which was a preserving of the ancient Indian Buddhist knowledge.
hmm
It's been lost in India because Buddhism was wiped out in India by foreign invasion starting about 1,000 years ago. And then I took a job. I was going to teach in Tibetans. I heard the Dalai Lama give a talk, but didn't really meet him. And in Delhi. And then my father passed away in New York, and I came back here just for the funeral and family things. And when I was here, though, I met in New Jersey, funnily enough, an hour from my where I grew up in Manhattan, Mongolian Lama who had been 35 years in Tibet and had Tibetan, degrees, Lama degrees type of thing. And then he and I had this karma where I couldn't go a step past him. And he became my teacher, and I learned the language, and I learned about Buddhism from him, and had some sort of transformative, relief by the way of some kind of meditative experiences. But then I was bugging him to be a monk because I wanted to be a Buddhist monk for life. This was all I wanted in life. And and he didn't. He said, "Your karma is not to be a monk formally. You are being a monk informally, and that's fine. But eventually, it's not your karma. So don't rush into the ceremonial, formality of it, because you're supposed to do that for life. And I'm telling you, you're not going to be that for life." But I wouldn't listen. I was 20, 21 years old. So then eventually, after a couple of years, he took me back to India himself. And he introduced me to the Dalai Lama. And then Dalai Lama took me under his wing. And then he did make me a monk. But then I only lasted another year and a half after that as a formal monk. And the old Lama's prediction turned out true, that I was called, this is middle of the 60s, civil rights movement, protests against the war, a whole psychological change of the U.S. Younger generation.
mm
And indeed, I had a role that was not possible to do as a Buddhist monk. And there was no real Buddhist monastic community to take care of me either. It was just a little temple my teacher had in New Jersey. So then I resigned as a monk, and that was a little bit of a shock to Dalai Lama at first. But then I went back, and about 2 or 3 years later, as a graduate student at Harvard, because I went back to Harvard with a wife and two children by then, and it was a kind of shock, but it was fine. And one of the reasons that the Dalai Lama and his teachers, who had been my teachers, during the couple of years I was there. They loved my children so much and my wife, and they figured she'd keep me going straight. So they forgave me, kind of. And then as a layperson,
Yes.
as an ordained, and then I was kind of ordained as a layperson instead. You sort of the vow is lesser, and you're a householder. So then, since then, I've been a householder friend of His Holiness on and off for 50 years, 53 years, 54 years now. And I've been ordered by His Holiness, who has promised to live to 113 if necessary.
Wonderful.
To straighten out the situation for his people. But he would rather not. He would rather change bodies into a new, younger one sooner. But he will and could do it until then. And then he ordered me to stay that long as well. And since I'm 6 years younger, that means 107. Again, I have no intention or wish to do that. I'd much rather be reborn in some other way before that, because the body gets so creaky,
Yes.
No need to keep it. The cheapest and the most effective way to be rejuvenated is to get reborn with a nice mom and dad in a good neighborhood.
And a nice new vehicle.
Where you can practice the Dharma more. You can cultivate your spiritual evolution toward Buddhahood more effectively. So that's our desire. But I guess I'll have to try to stay as long as he has to try to stay. And in a way, the obduracy and the persistence in a silly policy by the Chinese government, which is not the Chinese people who actually like the Dalai Lama a great deal, but the Chinese government acting like he's a bad guy or something when everybody in the world knows he's a really nice guy. We hope that will change before I'm 107.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I shared with you the course that I teach, and I have a lot of immigrant students. And since you went there, I would like to get your 2 cents on this. I've noticed that a lot of the younger Chinese population don't have access to the whole story. They're not being told who the Dalai Lama really is. And, it's a very manipulative thing. And I know it's a controversial thing to go into, but I think it benefits all of us to have the story straight. They're being told that he's a bad guy. And I was wondering, what else do you have to say about that? And how can we address that when it's so firmly entrenched in their mind that he's bad, and that Tibet is not autonomous, and it's a political situation, and it becomes very, very heated very quickly.
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, of course, you see, they do live in a police state, which America is sort of heading towards slightly, but we're not there yet, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But they do live in such a police state. And therefore, they're given only certain type of information. And not only that, but if they maintain certain views, they are jeopardized, their career and their activity. And they're also encouraged to observe each other. So they have to kind of be more and more gung-ho with the party line, whatever it is. And it may not actually be exactly what they think, in fact. And but they can't show what they think, really, they freely, Students, for example, who are there, you said immigrant, but I'm not sure if they're immigrant or if they are just visitors, student visa, what they are, what their role. But the Chinese consulate keeps very strong track ever since Tiananmen Square on any young people that they allow to be sent to the West. And so they're aware that whatever they say, is somebody else is listening to it. And, they have to say the party line. So you can't really tell necessarily exactly what they think. Like if you went to China yourself today and you would ask somebody would be minding you, and then people would say whatever they think the government wants you to hear. Because in fact, underground, even Communist Party officials love Tibetan lamas. They have, someone told me, I didn't see this program, but those programs that there's usually a sort of Brit type who is the monitor of the program, the
narrator.
Narrator.
Yeah.
And it's the rich and famous, the lifestyle of rich and famous. And they run into some Chinese billionaire types. And then these billionaires, they proudly say they have a Tibetan Lama on the top floor of their mentioned who was praying that their business goes well and doing rituals and meditating. And
Yes.
the Tibetan thing is a big mystique in China, in the popular mind, just like in the West, Shangri-La. We have the Shangri-La fantasy,
Yes. Yes.
which is not really the real thing, but
Right.
they do have that, and they
Mm.
do. And Buddhism is very strong, really, and a lot of Communist Party members themselves quietly have a lama. They go to Tibet to see some teacher, or they have one in Shanghai who teaches them, and it's quite a bit of something. So,
Interesting.
so that's one point. And
Okay.
then second point is, it's just a matter of them facing reality eventually. And Chinese people are very intelligent, very creative. They're not going to be brainwashed forever, and they will wake up to the situation. And we're confident within a very not such a long time, actually, because and furthermore, the policy of the leadership, and particularly Xi Jinping, who we actually like, although many people, sinologists and so forth, are afraid of him because they think he's like the new Mao because he's so popular and so
Mm.
and so on. But actually, his father was a close friend of the Dalai Lama when the Dalai Lama was 19 years of age.
Ah.
And the family has a special connection about Buddhism, actually. And we expect him, when he has sufficient power, to maybe change a foolish policy because they can tell people he's a bad guy, but the world really likes the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
He'll be right up there with the Pope and Angelina Jolie
Yeah.
and a few other people in the top most popular people. And Nelson Mandela, when he was still alive, Tutu, they're
Yes.
right there in popularity
Yeah.
worldwide. But the Chinese people don't know that. And so they think maybe they're going to have some mileage, get some traction in convincing everybody that the Dalai Lama is a wolf in sheep's clothing and all this kind of thing. But it's kind of actually makes them look silly. Great
Yes.
power, huge economy, running around after a monk who has no country, no army, no PR firm, and chasing him, trying to get people to think he's a bad guy. It's sort of kind of silly.
Yeah.
And on the contrary, if they took him at his word that he's not seeking to split from China, he can't he can't repeat the lie that Tibet was always owned by China or
Mm.
that Tibetans are Chinese, because that's not true. They are
Mm.
not. It's like the Lakota Indian is not actually like a Euro American. That's a fact here in America.
Yeah.
And so he can't do that. But he has said, and he constantly repeats to them since the 70s, that, okay, we are de facto part of China. We'll be part of China. We would just like local autonomy as promised to so-called minority nationalities in the Chinese constitution, so that you can't come in and destroy our monasteries, destroy our Buddhism with Marxism and so forth. We don't mind being Marxist in our governmental things, but we like to have our Buddhism. So it's actually a very moderate thing. He's not asking for splitting off from China, as they always insist they think it's so. But they know, actually, the leadership in China knows that he's sincere, but they pretend they don't believe him because they don't really want to go dialogue. Because once people have dialogue and he's openly not opposed by them, and he's even talks with them, everybody will investigate the Tibetan situation, including their own people. And then they realize that they did invade it in 1950. They have been doing a cultural genocide there. And they, with their thought reform and their anti-religion thing, the communist one. And they, so sorry, like we Americans, we admit we genocided the native people. But certain people who want to still have the Cleveland Indians or the Washington Redskins, they kind of don't want to really face it. In America,
Right.
they want to be in denial about it. But most people are open to the fact, and even in textbooks in schools now, oh, gee whiz, there are some Americans who were here before.
Yeah.
Canadians talk about the first Americans. We say Native Americans,
Yeah.
but sort of say. But in a way, we're still, our energy companies, like in Standing Rock, are still persecuting them, actually.
It is an interesting parallel, and it makes me wonder. I want to kind of bring us, since we're talking politics, we are in such a turbulent political time now, and I know that you've written on how Buddhism can be of practical use. And I get that a lot too. We have these ancient teachings, which are so valuable.
Yes.
How do you address that when people say, how can such an old teaching, how can a mystical teacher be relevant to our times today when we are self-destructing environmentally, politically, and we have so
Right.
many issues?
Right. Well, because he is a teacher, he's very clear, the Dalai Lama, when he lectures in America or Europe or Australia or anywhere that is not already, quote unquote, a Buddhist country to
Yeah,
a quote unquote formally Buddhist audience. He's very clear that he feels this time in history that world religions, so called, should not be trying to convert each other's adherents. So he tells young people, stay within the religious framework of your grandmother.
hmm,
Otherwise, your grandma will be upset. If you want to learn something
yeah,
from like Buddhism about meditating, about mindfulness, about how to cultivate your positive emotions, restrain your negative anger, hatred, jealousy, pride, egotism, narcissism, etc. If you want to learn something, use it, but use it as a Christian, use it as a Jew, use it as a Muslim, use it. Or he actually considers secular humanism a global religious movement
interesting.
to be respected, actually. He does,
So
although
he's practical. He doesn't want people to rock the boat. He feels they'll be more effective that way if they stay
yeah,
within their channels, so to
he
speak.
offers services about that. And his service in the socio-political realm is that another thing that we need to stop doing in the world is using war as a means of making decisions.
Yeah.
We have violence. We have to dialogue with people, even enemies. We have to talk to them. We have to come to a thing where no killing, no war is like a baseline. And sometimes we have to defend ourselves, of course. But as a baseline, no aggressive killing, no aggressive preemptive invasions, no such thing. They're counterproductive. And he notes that, along with other thinkers, nobody's won any wars lately, and they're not about
True.
to, because of the nature of the weaponry, nature of the information. You can't go out and say, oh, Ukrainians are a lower species of human than Russians, therefore we should go get all the Ukrainians and then enjoy it as a province of Russia. And we can't do that either with Mexicans or some other people, because everybody knows that everybody else is a human being now, you know. And also, weapons are too powerful where no one can win a war that you escalate. The winners will lose because the weapons are so powerful, you know. And there's a wonderful book that I love that isn't a Buddhist book by Jonathan Schell called The Unconquerable World, how the theory of war by von Clausewitz, the Prussian theorist of war that modern people are working on, modern militarist people, is no longer operative because you cannot get another country to do what you want by doing war on them, because in fact what you do nowadays is you destroy that country, and then what's left are some terrorists who are really mad that you killed their grandmother. You know what I mean?
And so the backlash is bigger
Yeah,
than it even would have been.